I didn't flinch when he said it. I just smiled, set down my coffee, and waited for the moment his entire fake life would collapse in front of everyone he was trying to impress. I was 34 years old, a corporate insurance investigator, and I had spent 11 years training myself to feel absolutely nothing on my face, while my brain calculated everything underneath. That training had never been tested like it was that morning at my nephew's christening, standing in the reception hall of St. Augustine's in Charleston, South Carolina, watching my ex-husband walk in holding hands with my younger sister. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is what happened next. It was a humid Saturday in late April, the kind of Charleston morning where the air sticks to your skin before 9 a.m. I had flown in from Atlanta the night before, driven straight to my parents' house, and gotten exactly 4 hours of sleep before putting on the pale blue dress I'd bought specifically for this event. My nephew, my brother's first son, was being baptized that day, and I had promised my brother I would be there no matter what. Even though my divorce had only been finalized 14 months earlier, and even though the wound from it was still tender in places I hadn't told anyone about. I should explain the divorce first, because none of what happened that morning makes sense without it. I had been married to a man named Holt. No, I need to stop myself there. That name belongs to someone else's story now, not mine. The man I married was named Weston Cole. We met in business school in Charlotte, both of us hungry and ambitious in the way people are at 26, and we got married 3 years later in a ceremony his mother paid for because she wanted everyone to see her son marrying a woman with a CPA license and a six-figure salary trajectory. I thought I had married a partner. What I actually married was a man who needed an accessory that could also balance a checkbook. For 9 years, I believed we were building something together. I covered the mortgage during the 2 years his consulting business floundered. I sat through 4 rounds of fertility treatments that drained almost $60,000 from our joint savings and gave us nothing but grief and exhaustion. I told myself the distance between us was just stress, just the natural cooling that happens in any long marriage, just something we'd work through once the financial pressure eased. What I didn't know was that my own sister had been easing his stress for almost 2 years. Her name was Bridget. No, I'm doing it again. Forgive me. I am going to call her what she became to me after that day. My sister. Just my sister. Because after everything, that's the only label that still feels honest. She was 29 when it all came out, 5 years younger than me, the baby of the family. The one our mother always said had a wild streak she'd grow out of. She never grew out of it. She just learned to hide it better, and she hid it inside my own home, in my own bed, while I was at fertility clinics trying to build a family with the man she was quietly dismantling behind my back. I found out the way most people find out these things, badly, suddenly, and in a way that made me feel like a fool for not seeing it sooner. A charge on a shared credit card for a hotel 40 minutes from our house, on a night Weston told me he was in Colombia for a client dinner. I didn't confront him right away. The investigator in me took over instead. I pulled 6 months of statements. I found the pattern. Tuesdays and Thursdays like clockwork, like he had a standing appointment for his own marriage's destruction. When I finally laid the statements out on our kitchen table and asked him to explain them, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked relieved. He told me he'd been trying to find the right time to tell me he wanted out, that he and my sister had found something real, that he was sorry it had to happen this way, but that sometimes life just takes you somewhere you don't expect. I filed for divorce 9 days later. It took 14 months, mostly because Weston fought me on the house, on the retirement accounts, on every single thing he could turn into a battle, just to make the process as miserable for me as possible. I walked away with less than I deserved, and more exhaustion than I knew a person could carry. My sister, in that same window of time, walked away with my husband, my decade of trust, and apparently no guilt whatsoever, because 8 months after the divorce was finalized, she married him in a small courthouse ceremony that our mother attended and I did not. I hadn't seen either of them in person since that courthouse wedding. I had built a careful, deliberate life that simply did not include them. I changed which family gatherings I attended. I scheduled my visits to Charleston around their absence. My brother, bless him, had quietly helped manage the choreography so our paths wouldn't cross. But you cannot choreograph around a baptism. My brother's son needed godparents, and my sister, in an act of audacity so staggering it almost impressed me, had asked to be one of them. My brother said yes before he thought it through, because that's who my brother is, a peacemaker who believes blood should always find a way back to itself. He called me the week before, apologetic, asking if I could just get through one afternoon for his son's sake. I said yes. I told myself I was strong enough to stand in a room with them for 2 hours without breaking. I was strong enough. I just didn't expect what they had planned for me. The reception hall was decorated in soft yellow and white, balloons shaped like ducks tied to the backs of chairs, a sheet cake with a tiny embroidered cross on top. I arrived a few minutes after the ceremony ended, having timed it deliberately so I wouldn't have to sit through the church service, watching my sister stand at the altar as a godmother, in a dress that probably cost more than my entire outfit. I was making small talk with my Aunt Roberta by the gift table when I felt the room shift, that particular electricity that moves through a crowd when two people who shouldn't be near each other suddenly are. Weston walked in first. He looked good, infuriatingly good, tan from what I'd later learn was a trip to Hilton Head, wearing a linen blazer that screamed money he hadn't earned through honest work. Behind him, holding the hand of a toddler I had never met, was my sister. I want to be honest about something. The child was not the betrayal. The child, a little girl named after our grandmother, had done nothing wrong, and seeing her for the first time, 2 years old with my sister's same stubborn chin, hit me with a grief I wasn't prepared for. I had spent $60,000 and 4 devastating rounds of treatment trying to have a child with the man standing across that room, and he had built a family with my sister in less time than it took our marriage to fully collapse. Weston saw me before I could retreat, and instead of the awkward nod I expected, instead of the mutual unspoken agreement adults usually make to avoid a scene at a child's baptism, he smiled. He actually smiled and started walking toward me, my sister trailing a step behind with the toddler on her hip. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said, loud enough that 3 conversations near us went quiet. "I have to say I'm impressed. Didn't think you had it in you." I set my plastic cup of lemonade down on the gift table. "Weston, you look good," he said in a tone that managed to make a compliment sound like an insult. "Healthier than I expected, honestly. I figured you'd have wasted away by now, living alone in that condo with no one to take care of." My sister laughed. Actually laughed, a high nervous sound that told me she knew exactly how cruel this was and had decided to enjoy it anyway. "Be nice," she said to him, in the same syrupy voice she used to use when we were teenagers, and she wanted me to cover for her with our parents. "I am being nice," Weston said. "I'm being honest. You should hear yourself sometimes, you know that? Always so cold, so calculating, it used to drive me crazy. Took me marrying someone with an actual heart to realize what I'd been missing." He glanced at the toddler on my sister's hip, then back at me, and his voice dropped into something performatively gentle, the kind of cruelty people dress up as concern. "I know the infertility thing was hard for you. I really do. But you have to understand some of us just weren't built to be alone forever. Some of us were built for this." He gestured at his daughter, at my sister, at the whole tableau of a family he'd built out of the wreckage of mine. I felt my Aunt Roberta's hand tighten on my arm. A silent "Are you okay?" I was more than okay. Because while Weston Cole was busy performing his happiness for an audience of relatives who hadn't seen me in over a year, he had absolutely no idea what I had spent the last 7 months doing with my professional skill set. Here is something Weston never understood about me, even after 9 years of marriage. I do not get angry the way other people get angry. I get precise. About 7 months after the divorce was finalized, I had taken on a new case at work, an unrelated commercial fraud investigation involving a regional property development firm. In the course of that investigation, while cross-referencing shell company filings across the Southeast, a name surfaced that made my stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with my actual assignment: Weston Cole. Listed as a silent partner in a development LLC that was funneling investor money into properties that didn't exist on the scale being claimed. I want to be very clear about something. I did not go looking for this. I am not the villain who weaponized my job to destroy my ex-husband out of spite. I stumbled onto it doing legitimate work, and once I saw it, I had 2 choices: walk away and pretend I hadn't seen it, or pull the thread the way I'd pulled threads my entire career. I am an insurance investigator, not a securities lawyer, and I knew immediately this was outside my lane. But I also knew exactly who to call. My closest friend from business school, a woman who now worked as a forensic accountant for the South Carolina Securities Division, had spent a decade building cases exactly like this one. I brought what I'd found to her, not as my sister's husband, not as my ex, but as a name in a fraud pattern that deserved scrutiny regardless of his last name or his relationship to me. She took it seriously immediately because the numbers were that bad. Over the following months, while I went on with my quiet, unremarkable life, the securities division built a case I had no formal role in beyond being the person who first noticed the name. Weston, it turned out, had used part of the divorce settlement money, the money he fought me so viciously for, as seed capital to buy into the LLC, promising investors, many of them retirees in our own community, returns on luxury vacation properties along the coast that were, in reality, barely more than cleared lots and a glossy brochure. My sister, according to records, had actively helped recruit several of those investors through her real estate contacts, vouching personally for Weston's business acumen to people who trusted her family name. I learned 2 days before the baptism that an arrest was imminent. I had not told my brother. I had not told my parents. I genuinely did not know it would happen that weekend, in that hall, in front of that cake with the little embroidered cross. So when Weston stood in front of me at my nephew's christening, performing his cruelty for an audience, telling me I was cold and calculating and built to be alone, I simply smiled and said, "You might be right about the cold part." He smirked, satisfied, like he'd won something. "But I wouldn't worry too much about being alone if I were you," I continued. "I'd worry about Tuesday." His smile faltered just slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't get to answer, because at that exact moment, the double doors at the back of the reception hall opened, and 2 investigators from the South Carolina office of the Attorney General walked in, flanked by a uniformed officer. I recognized one of them from a deposition months earlier. I had not invited them, I had not orchestrated this moment with any theatrical intention. The timing was simply, devastatingly, real life. The room went silent in a way I have never experienced before or since. My sister's face drained of color so fast, I genuinely worried she would faint, the toddler still balanced on her hip, oblivious, reaching for a balloon string nearby. Weston turned, and I watched recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Weston Cole?" the lead investigator said, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall. "We need you to come with us." "This is a christening," Weston said, his voice cracking in a way I had genuinely never heard before, not once in 9 years of marriage. "You can't. There are children here." "We're aware," the investigator said, not unkindly, just professionally. "We tried your office and your residence. Your attorney was notified an hour ago." What followed was not the clean, simple justice you see in movies. It was messy and human and awful in the way real consequences usually are. My sister set the toddler down with our great-aunt Roberta with shaking hands and followed Weston toward the door, sobbing, asking questions no one would answer for her. My mother grabbed my arm and demanded, in a furious whisper, whether I had done this, whether I had ruined her grandson's baptism on purpose. I told her the truth. I had reported what I found because it was my job to report it, and I had no idea it would happen today, in this room, in front of everyone she'd invited. She didn't believe me, not that day. It took her almost 3 months to come around, and even then it was less an apology than a quiet acknowledgement, over coffee, that she understood why I couldn't have stayed silent about something like that, family or not. What happened over the following year, I learned mostly secondhand. The way you learn about a storm that passed through a town you used to live in. Weston was charged with securities fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The investigation eventually identifying losses of just over $4 million across 31 investors, several of them elderly Charleston residents, who had trusted my sister's recommendation specifically because she shared my family's name, a name people in that community had known and respected for 2 generations. He took a plea deal 18 months later that kept him out of a federal facility but left him with 7 years, a permanent felony record, and restitution obligations that will likely follow him for the rest of his working life. My sister was never criminally charged. The investigators determined she had been used, knowingly or not, as an unwitting credibility tool rather than an active conspirator, though her real estate license was suspended pending a civil review that ultimately ended her career in that field entirely. She lost the house, a beautiful restored single in the historic district that Weston had purchased partly with the fraud proceeds, and that was seized as part of asset forfeiture. She moved into a rental apartment near our parents with her daughter, working a front desk job at a dental office, a long, humbling distance from the woman who once laughed at me across a gift table for being cold and calculating. I did not feel triumphant when I heard all of this. I want to say that plainly because I think people expect a story like mine to end with fireworks and champagne, the way these things sometimes get told. What I felt was something quieter and, honestly, more useful, a settling. A confirmation that the version of myself I had built after the divorce, careful, precise, unwilling to perform forgiveness I didn't feel, was the right one to have built. I started seeing my niece, the little girl with our grandmother's name and our family's stubborn chin, about a year after everything happened. Once my sister had stabilized enough to allow supervised visits, and once I had worked through, in therapy, what it meant to love a child who existed because of my own husband's affair. It is not simple. It will probably never be simple. But she is family, and she did not choose any part of what happened to bring her into the world, and I refuse to let her carry the weight of her parents' choices the way I once let myself carry. The weight of being told I wasn't built for a family of my own. My sister and I are not close. I don't know if we ever will be again, and I have made a kind of peace with that uncertainty. But we speak now, carefully, most about her daughter, mostly in short, practical sentences that don't reopen old wounds. It is not friendship, it is not forgiveness, exactly. It is something more like a truce between two people who used to be everything to each other, and are now figuring out, slowly, what they can still be. As for Weston, I think about him less than people probably expect. He is somewhere in a medium security facility in the upstate, and his name occasionally surfaces in restitution paperwork that lands on my desk because the case files overlap briefly with reports I still handle. I read those numbers the way I read any other case, with precision, without sentiment, without the slightest urge to gloat. He once told me in a crowded reception hall full of people who loved my brother's new son that I was cold and calculating, that I wasn't built for love, that some people just weren't meant for the kind of family he thought he'd found with my sister. He was wrong about almost everything that day. But he was right about one thing, even if he meant it as an insult. I was built to notice what other people missed, to follow a thread until it told the truth, no matter who it belonged to or what it cost me personally to pull it. That isn't coldness. That's the only kind of love I have ever fully trusted, the kind that doesn't lie to you, even when the truth is the hardest thing in the room.